Chapter 30. Dan, are we ready? Rock and roll. All right, Genesis chapter 30. Now 2 weeks ago, you guys, and this is kind of a bummer because it's hard to stay in the groove with the book of Genesis here when like last week, we had Easter, which kind of broke up, and praise the Lord, by the way, you guys, let me just say this. Last week, I was flying high for days after last week's service. I was so blessed. There must have been 125 people in here. It was just such a blessing. And to see people's hearts and lives turned over to Christ again, and one person for the first time, one person got saved last week. That's what we live for, And so what a blessing. And then, the week before we finished half of chapter 30, of Genesis chapter 30. So today we're going to kind of finish the other half, and we'll see if we get into 31 at all. And then it's unfortunate because next week, although we're excited about Pastor Denny coming, and I can't wait to hear. As I talked to him on the phone 3-4 weeks ago, he was like all pumped up to share with us what's going on. He said there might be opportunities for us actually here in the United States to do missions to Islam. So, hang on for all that stuff. And as was Tom already said, invite people. It's going to be interesting to hear some of the stories, because this is a guy, he goes over to Afghanistan or Pakistan or wherever he goes, and he witnesses to Muslims Christ. And so you want to hear some radical testimony. Next week's going to be fun. So invite some people out. But we are in that area of the world today. We're in Haran today. Jacob has now been dwelling in the land of Haran, the place where his forefathers came to Canaan from. And he's with Uncle Laban now, anywhere from 15 to 17 or so years. How do we know that? Well, he worked 7 years. If you remember, he worked 7 years for Rachel, and then was tricked into getting Leah, and then agreed to work yet another 7 years, right? And was given Rachel before the end of that 7 years. Okay, so now he's got the 2 wives, more than he bargained for. He ends up, as we remember from 2 weeks ago, he ends up with 4 wives, as this competition brews between the 2 sisters, Leah and Rachel, as to who can have Jacob's love and attention. Leah's feeling unloved. Rachel's loved because it was the apple of his eye, Jacob's eye. He had a passionate love for her. She was beautiful to him. And, she had so much going for her. She was the younger one. She was the pretty one, so on and so forth. Leah was jealous. And so you remember Rachel was barren, couldn't have children. Leah could. So there was a competition that brewed. And they were, sharing their maids, each of their maids, Bilhah and Milcah, whatever her name was. And so now he's got 4 wives. And so he's bearing all these children. And by the end of our message 2 weeks ago, they had 11 kids. And I think Benjamin has yet to be born, and we'll see that later on. And so now this whole competition, Jacob's got a whole mess on his hands. And here's the thing you got to get in your head before we get further into this part of the chapter here, is Jacob has lived a life of manipulation. It has always been his way, is to manipulate to get what he wants, even when God has already promised to give it to him. And remember, the framework for this message is as Christians, the temptation, even though we might know what God's will is, but sometimes the temptation is maybe to help God a little, right? Is we kind of sort of compromise a little bit here or there, saying, well, God's going to do this thing anyway, and so, he's already promised it, I believe it, but just this one little thing's in the way, and all I need to do is this other little thing, and yet we know that that's not how God would do it. And let me just encourage you that when it comes to obtaining the promises of God, whether you have strong faith and believe that God's going to give it to you or not, it's always, always, always better to keep your hands off of it and let God do it in His time, because then you'll never look back and wonder if you might have messed something up, even when God brings you that thing. And then when there's problems in the midst of it, be it whatever, a husband, wife, a house, a car, a job, whatever it might be, if you manipulate to get it, you'll never have absolute surety or confidence that it was God who gave it to you, or in His perfect timing, or in His perfect way or will. And you'll always wonder how you negatively affected this thing that God has done. And Jacob is reaping the benefits, or I should say the consequences, of a life of manipulation. And now, as he goes forward here with his children, he realizes, you know what? It's time for us to go. We got to leave this place. We got to go back to the promised land. And he's somewhere around 90 years old now, okay, with a lot of life lived and a lot of experience. And hopefully, I think we see a beginning of a change in Jacob today as we look at some of the things, the way he handles himself. We'll begin in verse 25. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I might go to my own place and to my own country." Now notice he refers to it as my place and my country. Not my father's, not my grandfather's, Abraham or whoever. This is the land he recognized God has given to him as part of a covenant that he's made not just with him, with all mankind. The covenant that Jacob is making reference to when he references Canaan as his land is that God will bring about through his seed a great nation of people that will bless the whole earth. And the Messiah, of course, would come through him as well. And it's his country, it's his land. And you know what's so funny about this whole concept of having a land and a place where God has told you this is where you're to dwell is Christina and I went through this very same thing for the longest time, where we wondered where our land was. We met in California, married on Maui. 4 months to the day after I met Christina, we were married. 4 months. Now, keep in mind, we were on a Bible college campus together. We saw each other every day for hours, so it was like kind of like an incubator. Right, Joe? That place? It's like a little bubble, right? The relationship just goes like, it's incredible how it grows so fast. And Pastor Dave flew over to Maui and did our wedding. We lived there for a year and a half, right? Then we're trying to figure out what's God's will for us as a family. Where are we going to live and serve and breathe and have our being? And so, then we're like, after about a year and a half, we're like, you know what? We're not supposed to be here anymore. Where are we going? I don't know. Where should we go? Both of us are, the whole time, we're getting to know each other. We're really, just developing a deep relationship. And we always both felt like called or at home, in a sense, to the East Coast. No real definition there, just the upper half of it. We really didn't care much for the lower half. From about the Outer Banks up and, maybe south of New York City. So that's the stretch that we both kind of like. Well, she kind of liked Connecticut. I was like, no way, too many Red Sox fans up there. Sorry, Hank. But Lord, we'll go wherever you want, is how we kind of say that. And so I pick up the phone, and my pastor, Dave Shirley, the director of the Bible college out there, is from North Carolina. He had planted a church there many years before that. And so I call him up, and I'm saying, Dave, Christina and I, we know we're supposed to leave Maui. We know we're supposed to come back to the mainland. We're not real sure where. We were thinking maybe since there's no Calvary chapels out on the Outer Banks, and since we love it there, maybe we'll just move out there. Maybe you could call some of your pastor friends down North Carolina, and we could have like a system of support where if we need them, we could call on them. Not that they'd give us monetary support, but just that we would have, maybe they could let people know who live out there that we're there or something. And he goes, yeah. He's from North Carolina, keep in mind. He goes, I like the sound of that. Calvary Chapel, Kill Devil Hills. Yeah. That's what he said. Anyway, you're from North Carolina, you understand that. Kill Devil Hills is a town, by the way, down there where the Wright brothers had their first flight, but we love that area. And then he said, you know what, y'all could do that, but why don't you come out here back to the Bible college? I can give you both jobs, and you can, just regroup here and see what the Lord might have for you. And that's, most of you know that's what we ended up doing. We moved back from Maui back to California to the Bible college. We were both on staff there. They gave me a staff position and made me faculty. That's, Jordan Andrian was in my Matthew class that I taught, and yet he still walks with the Lord. Isn't that amazing? I just can't believe it. I know, me too. But, and so, but the whole thing was, Lord, where is the land where you've called us to dwell? Where's the land where you've called us to dwell? And then over time, as we continued to pray, the Lord kept bringing verses in our devotions, in our private devotions, independent of one another. We both, Christina says to me one day, the Lord brought me to Joshua a couple weeks ago. I said, what day? She told me. I was like, you got to be kidding me. I said, I'm in Joshua from the same day too. The Lord brought us both to the same book at the same time, and we were both learning the same things as the Lord was ministering to us about, being led and about trusting and not fearing and about where is our land, and so the Lord has obviously brought us here. This has very clearly become our land. We feel like we belong here. And not just New Jersey. I mean like the beach. That's easy for me to say, isn't it? Keep in mind, we left Maui to come here, you guys, okay? So when I tell you I feel called to the beach, look at my aloha shirt and remember that, will you? So, but it's so important that you personally know that there's a sense about, that you are where you're supposed to be, that God has called you to be with, and not just like the plot of land that, you park your car. I'm talking about the building that you go to work and the time clock you punch and the people you spend time with. And what is the land God has given you? What's your ministry and your calling in life? And I think, Jacob here is recognizing, you know what? It's time to me to go back and to walk in the place where I'm called to walk and for God to fulfill his promises. Now, just like the enemy, who is every bit as real as God, Laban is going to do everything he can to stop the work of God. And we got to see that this is what's going on. And manipulation will only serve to delay God's promises in fulfilling you walking in your land. When we manipulate God, it only serves to delay and sometimes even possibly cancel out, depending on what you believe, some of the promises God has for us. Now, I'm not saying our performance is what God depends on in order to bless us. That's not true, because that takes grace out of the equation. Anything that God gives us, whether it be a land or a ministry, any influence, it's by his grace, through faith, not of works, lest anyone should boast. And now, finally, as we're going to see, Jacob's getting the picture. He's not going to manipulate as much anymore. But here he says in verse 26 to Laban, "Give me my wives." That's pretty bold right there, first of all. I got 4 of them. Maybe I can just say, well, let me have my wife, and I could just slip by, and maybe I could. But no, you know what? I think he's learned a lesson here. He's done what he's done, and he has to love all that he's committed to love. That's what I see Jacob doing here. He's got Leah, he's got her maid. He's got Rachel, he's got her maid. And now he has to love all 4 of them. And I know it sounds crazy because we know God would have us to only be married, obviously, one husband, one man, one woman. But yet he recognizes a responsibility and he says, "Give me my wives." And he says, "And my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I've done for you." Have you ever entered into a contract or an agreement with somebody, be it verbal or written, and wondered if you'd be forced at some point, or even had an inkling or known, that at some point this person was going to renegotiate with you, and that a contract or an agreement literally meant nothing to them? That's Laban. Laban will agree to anything as long as he gets what he wants, and then he'll change the rules as he goes. And you ever met somebody like that? We don't want to be like that. Jacob's learning how not to be like that. Why? He's coming face to face with himself. Jacob is a manipulator. Laban is a manipulator. Jacob's having to face himself and Laban, the part of himself that he does not want to like, or he shouldn't like, or he should be growing to despise. The things about himself he should be growing to despise, he's coming face to face with in Laban. Laban said to him, "Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Now, if you ever read or study in the Hebrew in this particular verse, you'll find that the phrase rendered in English, you can read it there again in 27, "have learned by experience." That phrase contains a word, help me out on this here, Jordo, nechesh. Nechesh. You remember this one? No, it literally means enchantments or divination. And let me reread this now with that word and replace it. It literally is translated, could be translated, I have learned according to or by enchantments or divination that by you God has blessed me. And so Laban, as we will see as we go forward, as we get into 31, we're going to see that he had given up on the God of his parents. He had now embraced a paganism and a polytheism. He seems to be either himself practicing or at least consulting those who practice worship in the spirit realm. Divination, enchantments. It'd be like going to, what's her name down the street here, Lady Fatima. You ever seen the sign out there? And seeking wisdom from her. and then beginning to somehow trust. And you know what? Sometimes these people get, I don't want to call it lucky, because I never want to discount the spiritual realm. Sometimes I think that these people are actually tapping into real spirits, but guess what? They're not your dead relatives. I don't believe that. They are fallen angels that will cause these people to believe or give the names of possibly, your dead relatives and share secrets with them. And listen, this is scary stuff. Laban's fully into this. As we'll see later in 31, as Jacob's pulling away with his wives, one of them, Rachel, steals some of his gods. He worships idols. He looks to the spiritual realm. Oh, maybe he'll worship, Jacob's God also. But just like, they do in, what is that they do in India, right? They accept, they accept all gods, right? Oh, you're just going to add another god to their list if you share with them Jesus. Oh, yeah, what's his name? Oh, we'll worship him too. Doesn't work that way. In verse 28. Important to recognize, though, that it's Jacob's God, Laban knows, is the responsible for all the blessing and wealth that he has. Then he said, this is Laban trying to convince Jacob to stay. Now keep in mind, Laban, this is his technique, just to get Jacob to enter into a negotiation. Name me your wages and I'll give it. Does he mean that? No. He has no intention of living up to anything he agrees to here. He just is trying to get Jacob to enter into a negotiation, right? And so I'll just, name me your wages, whatever it is, you got it. And then I'll redefine it later on. It doesn't matter. Now, as Christians, guys, listen. It's so important that in the world today that we put on display something different than this. Turn for a second to Psalm 15. Psalm 15. Turn with me there. David, above all things, I think, was a guy that, listen, this is important, that asked the right questions. I think that's one of the secrets to getting along in the world today, is knowing what questions to ask, who to ask them from. But, David had no problem with that. He went to the Lord with all this stuff. But David, like no one else, knew what questions to ask. And in Psalm 15, we see clearly probably the most important question any human being will ever ask. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? That's it. Who gets to hang out with God? Right? Now, isn't that the question we all want to know? Will I get to be with God? Will I get to hang out with God? Not just in heaven for eternity, but what about here too? I mean, salvation obviously is our first and foremost goal. We want to make sure eternity's spoken for. Then after that's taken care of, I want to hang out with God now. David's asking that question. He who walks uprightly. Now, David was a prophet, and we're not told here that God spoke these things to him and he repeats them, but obviously he's learned this from the Lord. Now listen to what he says. He who walks uprightly and he who works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. All these three are godly vertical attributes. Vertical godly attributes. He who walks uprightly, works righteousness, and speaks the truth in his heart. Why are they vertically godly attributes? Because God decides what's upright and righteous, and God determines or knows what's in our heart. Only God, correct? Now, clearly, compared to Laban is the opposite of this. He cares nothing about having his own intimate relationship with this God, but wants to benefit instead from Jacob's relationship with God. Right? Sometimes I see kids doing that. Their parents have, their parents are deacons in the church, and they serve in the church, or dad's a pastor and so on, and they go through their lives thinking that they're fine because they grew up in a Christian house. It doesn't work that way. He goes on to say in verse 3, now he turns his attention to horizontal godly attributes as he looks about how we treat one another and how God would have us treat one another. He says, he who does not backbite with his tongue, nor does evil to his neighbor, nor does he take up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but he honors those who fear the Lord. Horizontal, godly attributes. How we act, treat, believe the things about each other. Now, backbite with his tongue, we all know that that's like, speaking about people behind their backs and, and having a sharp-witted tongue to tear someone down. Nor does evil to his neighbor, only wishes the best for them, even though those that he doesn't like. Nor does he take up a reproach against his friend. He lets no root of bitterness take place in his heart. And in whose eyes a vile person is despised. This is a person who, listen, he's not saying hates people who love sin. He's saying hates the sin of people who hate God, okay? So, God wants us to love the person, love the sinner, hate the sin. God wants us to love the sinner. Why? Because we're not their judge. We're only here as a mechanism of God, as a means of sharing the love and the grace of God with them in hopes that they'll turn to God. And so this is how David answers his question. These attributes, be they vertical, be they horizontal, this is the kind of person who may abide in your tabernacle. Now again, these things are obtained not by works. It's not like you become this and now you've earned salvation in God's presence. It's only by faith. But these are those who dwell closely and have an intimate relationship with the Lord. And now listen to what he says. This is one of my favorite verses, and I've often applied this to myself in difficult times. He, listen, who swears to his own hurt and does not change. Wow. Have you ever made a promise and then circumstances change and everything's like, oh my goodness. Well, obviously, that promise doesn't mean anything now. I mean, the person I made that promise to will never expect me to uphold my end of the bargain because the circumstances obviously have changed. And now, what was supposed to not cost me any money, in fact, both of us were going to make money, now it's going to cost me money. And that was never part of the agreement. And now this person, I'm sure they're just going to let me out of the deal. That's not what this is saying. Blessed is the man who swears to his own hurt. In other words, you never even pick up the phone and call that person. You never even consider asking them if they'll think about or pray about giving up your end of the bargain. You just go about and trust the Lord and say, all right, Lord, you've led me into these circumstances. You've got something in this for me. I had a set of circumstances similar to this happen. When we were living on Maui, there was a vehicle that had been given to me, and we were planning to move. And I thought, all right, well, I don't need this vehicle anymore, and I'm going to give it away, and or I'm going to sell it to somebody because it obviously had a value, and we needed every dime we could muster. So I agreed to a friend of mine who actually was living on the same property as us, renting from my father-in-law, to sell him this truck for $1,000. And it was, it was probably worth a little more than that, but I was wanting to give him a good deal. And it was a nice little old Toyota pickup truck. The thing will run forever and whatever. But the person who had given it to me found out and said, no, I want it back. And they wanted me to give it back to them after they had given it to me. And they said they never intended for me to sell it, that when I was done with it, their intention was, now this is the person who signed the title, gave it to me and said it's yours. And so here I am in a situation now, this person was someone very close to my wife's family, and obviously it was going to bring a lot of very difficult circumstances for her and her family. And so I was stuck between my wife and her family and this person who I had made an agreement with. And I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? How am I going to solve this problem? Well, fortunately, the person who said he wanted the truck back said, whatever you told the kid you'd sell it to, I'll give you that for it back. So at least I was getting something. So I turned around and I said to this person, Brandon, who I had promised to sell this truck to, I told him the story and I said, would it be okay if I gave you the $1,000 that that I'm getting for the truck instead of giving you the truck? Now this kid's thinking like, wait a minute. I'm just going to get $1,000 for nothing? I'm like, yeah. Why are you doing that? Because the Lord told me that's what I'm supposed to do. And that's what I did. I was just like, but you know what? I walked away from the circumstances feeling like I'm clean. I fulfilled both of my obligations. The person who I didn't want to upset because it would ruffle the feathers of the family, I satisfied them. And even if I would have had to take $1,000 out of my own bank account, that's what I would have done. But I don't want to look back on those circumstances and think that that person maybe has a different view of who the Lord is because of the way I treated them. I can't live with that. Laban apparently doesn't care. Now it goes on to say in this Psalm 15, this person who wants to dwell with the Lord and have this intimate relationship and always have this peace between him and God does not put out his money at usury. Usury is a word, our English word. It came from a Latin word, and depending on at what time you did the translation, that word, that Latin word, either meant a fee, a straightforward fee for loaning money, or it also at times meant an illegal fee, meaning that there was a legal limit that was set and that you were not allowed to charge over that, and this word would mean that. And I think that probably that's along the lines. It means do not loan out your money at an unreasonable or illegal usury. Interest is what it's saying. Don't do that. Because you're taking advantage of somebody. And speaking along those lines, taking advantage of somebody, look at this next portion of verse 5. Nor does he take a bribe against the innocent. Someone who you find and who's down on their luck, and you take advantage of them. You know what's funny is just in the past couple days, who has cable in here? Just raise your hand. I'm not going to ask you what channels you have. Don't worry. Okay. Well, we happen to have a company, and you know, I obviously don't want to mention their name, Comcast, but tell me if you're familiar with this, okay? Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. They want everything that they sell, they want it in your house, be it phone, cable, and internet, right? And so they package it together and give you a price that makes it cheaper to have all three than if you had two of them separately. Literally, that's how it works. And for 2 or 3 years now, we've gotten to the end of a $99 a month triple play package, and you call them up and you say, hey, I see a lot of heads going like this. This is great. I know this one's going to be great. You guys are going to love this. You guys are going to laugh at me. Anyway, so I get them on the phone like, well, sorry, that program no longer exists. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll call you back and let you know whether I still exist. So I know how this works. You know, I get on the phone, I get in the internet, I do some investigation. What else is available to us? And literally, this is how you do it, guys. You could tell Comcast I told you to do it. It's okay. You have to be literally ready to cancel and change, okay? And this is what I went as far as to do this. I had DirecTV scheduled April 28th to come and put a dish in, and I was going to retain nothing but internet through Comcast because that's all I can get where I live. I don't have Fios at the street or any of that stuff. So this is this. My wife and I come to this decision. This is what we're doing. So I call Comcast back up. I said, you know what? I said, I spoke to one of your representatives yesterday. Oh, yes, we see here in the notes, okay. And I'm very sorry, but I want you to turn my cable off and my phone as of April 29th. I have DirecTV coming in. Oh, Mr. Durante, we don't want to lose your business. You're a valued customer. Da, 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 da. Let me, please hold on a second. Let me see what I can. Guess what? The $99 program is, they just started it back up again April 1st. Yeah, I told you were going to laugh. So do not believe what they tell you, but be willing at any time to go back and say, I quit. Okay? But where was I, by the way? How we deal with people in this world. Psalm 15, yes. I'm sorry if I'm getting off on a tangent today, but I just had to share that with you because, whatever. Anyway. But listen, if you want to have peace with God, you want to have that intimate relationship with the Lord where you're constantly walking with Him, do everything in the light. You know, you're selling a used car, hand the person the list of everything that's wrong with it that you're aware of. And say, you want to go get it checked out by your mechanic? Please do that. Don't buy it unless, you're thoroughly convinced. Jay was looking back at Ed DeFelice. He's waiting for me to make a joke about I'm not going to go there, man. But listen to this consequence now. This is how David finishes this psalm. He who does these things shall never be moved. That's what I want. I'm going to be moved by other things, right? I don't want to be moved by these things. The Apostle Paul said in Acts that he will not be moved. How is it that you can never be moved? Have peace with God, regardless of the consequences. Swear to your own hurt, uphold your end of the bargain, and so on. I better put the pedal to the metal. Verse 29, so Jacob said to him, we're back to Jacob and Laban. Jacob's entering into the negotiation process here. He says, you know how I've served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it is now increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now, when shall I also provide for my own house? Look, God's blessed you already. You've got this abundant wealth because of me being here. Now it's my turn to go work on my family. Take what God has given you and let me go. At this point, listen, at this point, if you're Laban, if you care about your relationship with God, you say, you know what, you're right. Pick from among the flock. Take whatever it is you think you're going to need to get started and go your way and have my blessing. And I got to believe if Laban does this, God's just going to continue to bless him for that, even in spite of the fact that he doesn't care about the things of the Lord. But if he does understand that God has blessed him because of Jacob, this is exactly what he should do. He cares only about how much he can get out of Jacob. He thinks Jacob is the answer to his, wanting another. Who was it? Rockefeller said, how much is enough? Somebody said to Rockefeller, how much is enough? How much money is enough? And he said, just one more dollar. Did you ever hear that? Just one more dollar. In other words, it's never enough. You always want just one more dollar once you're like Laban. And Laban's like, Jacob's the one more dollar. I'm going to hang on to him as long as I can. And so he said to Jacob, what will I give you? And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. I don't want anything that you want to give if you will do this thing for me. So in other words, at this point, he's like, okay, I get it. You want me to stay. So he's like acquiescing. I'm going to stay. I'm going to make now an offer to you. You don't give me anything. You're not doing the right thing and sending me on my way. He says, you do this thing for me and I will again feed and keep your flocks. Jacob agrees to tend the flock until such a time that he has enough himself to leave with, since Laban wasn't going to give it to him. Let me pass through your flock. This is the deal, you guys. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. Pass through your flock today, meaning I'll get them now. And so my righteousness will answer for me in time to come. When the subject of my wages comes before you, every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it is with me. And so what he's basically saying here, if you can get the gist of this, is look, just separate all the speckled, spotted, striped ones. Leave the solid colored ones with me. The offspring of those as I tend them will be my wages. The rest of them you take and you keep separate. Now, Jacob is being very clear here. This is an easy way to just observe simply what's his and what's not, right? Keep it as simple as possible. I like this method. Now, Jacob is doing this knowing that Laban views this as, man, this is a great deal for me. What are the odds of these solid colored, sheep and goats and lambs? What are the odds of these solid colored ones producing a lot of speckled and spotted ones? He doesn't know anything about genetics. But on the other hand, Jacob knows a whole lot more about raising cattle than Laban does. He's been doing it his whole life. And so now he knows something. He knows what the Lord's going to do, and he's stepping out in faith. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to give you a deal you can't refuse, Laban. Something you can't even go back on. You take all the speckled, spotted, striped ones now. Leave me all the solid colored ones. Whatever is birthed among them that's speckled, striped, or spotted, okay, are mine. It's very simple. And Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word. Great, we got a deal. So he removed that day all the male goats that were speckled, spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hands of his sons. And listen to this. He put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. 3 days' journey means he wanted to make sure there was no way Jacob could take some of the solid colored ones, and in the middle of the night take them and mate them with the speckled and spotted ones to try to get more speckled and spotted ones. That's basically it. There's no way to do it overnight. There's no way to do it in even a day or two, because it's 6 days round trip, right? So it's impossible. So, Laban obviously doesn't trust Jacob, even though he's getting this phenomenal deal. Verse 37. Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled he set before the flocks in the gutters and in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. Now, for some reason, you guys, don't ask me a bunch of questions about this afterwards. There's all kinds of speculation. I've read the different commentaries. Listen, Jacob knew something about, he stripped the bark from these different kinds of trees and he put them down in the bottom of the water troughs. And some suggest, well, it has to do with, as they looked down and saw these stripes, that it somehow visually promoted speckled and spotted or striped. And I'm like, whatever. Or some others people suggest that some of these particular trees had chemicals in them, and by pulling the bark off, it released the chemicals into the water, and this was somewhat of an aphrodisiac to cause them to want to procreate. I kind of buy into that theory a little bit more. Whatever the story is, Jacob knew about this stuff. I think even more than scientists today probably do, because the way that he rose, sheep and took care for sheep is completely different than they do it today. So I think that's the main thing to remember. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. And so, at some point, by the way, we waver back and forth, and I'm thinking about this as we question these things about the Bible. We waver back and forth between the natural and the supernatural. Do you get what I'm saying? Was this because of Jacob's years of experience of raising sheep? Or was this purely just the hand of God instructing him and leading him throughout the whole thing? And we waver back and forth. Are we having success in our business? Are we having success in our ministry because it's us? Because, we were born with this natural ability, and God's blessing it. But really it's a mixture of us and God. No, absolutely not. Every single thing that you gain, whether you're the best at it in the world or not, is at God's hand. Period, amen. We need to learn to see that everything that we have, God has given us. And we're only stewards of these things. And now God is going to bless Jacob because God is going to bring forth a promise through Jacob. God gives and he takes away. He blesses the righteous and the unrighteous by his own wisdom. For his ways are not ours, and his thoughts far beyond ours. And Jacob separated the lambs, and he made the flocks face toward, again, don't ask me why he did this, I don't know, face toward the streaked and the brown of the flock of Laban, but he put his own flocks by themselves, excuse me, and he did not put them with Laban's flock. And now he's beginning to build his own flock, building a future for himself. And now he even makes sure that the healthy among his own flock get stronger and stronger, as we're going to see. And he actually does the opposite for Laban. Look, verse 41. It came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among all the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Listen, he made the deal with Laban. Laban said, you go ahead and you do as you just said. You take the speckled, spotted, striped, give me the plain, and you can tend the flock. Well, he's tending the flock, he's fulfilling his obligation, and he's building a future for himself. Thus the man, Jacob, became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Before our eyes, as we look at this, and we're not going to get into 31 today, obviously, but as we look at this, Jacob is learning to trust the Lord in his business dealings, and even to the point of agreeing to the favor of his enemy. He's entering into agreements with the favor of the enemy, and yet at the same time he's saying, you know what, I just trust God. I'll set this up this way. I know something about raising sheep. I'm trusting God's going to bless it. And he walks that way, and he says, you know what, I'm not going to make things happen for myself. I'm going to let God do it. We're going to end here. But there's one thing I want to share with you. My wife found this on Fox News, and I wanted to read it for you. I thought it was apropos. Newsweek's magazine sensationalist cover story headlined, the decline and fall of Christian America was, in my view, the result of an underlying agenda that caused the article to draw the wrong conclusion. This is, by the way, the pastor of Capital Life Church. The article did, however, prompt me to consider the fact that Christians must never be complacent about their faith. We must continue to nurture and, of course, share it. Posted here are some thoughts on how we could lose, listen, a standard of faith. How American Christianity could possibly decline and fall. Such a decline and fall would start with the individual. Here are some of the examples of what each of us could do to make America, quote unquote, post-Christian. If you're not familiar with what post-Christianity is, look at Europe, look at France, it's post-Christianity. Number 1, reduce your prayer life to blessing your meals. Number 2, embrace a form of religion over Jesus. Number 3, win arguments but lose people. Number 4, choose which parts of the Bible you want to believe and discard the rest. Number 5, don't share your faith so as not to offend. Number 6, dilute the message to gain a wider audience. Wow. Number 7, embrace success and forget the poor. Number 8, get uncomfortable around the unchurched. Number 9, keep the Bible on the shelf. And number 10, keep Jesus in stained glass. 10 things that can help send America into a post-Christian state. It goes on to say, through the generations, Jesus' followers have established schools, hospitals, and orphanages. They have reminded the world that man is not an end to himself. The call now goes out to a new generation. The scriptures declare, you are the salt of the earth, the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men that they will see your good deeds and glorify God. Praise your Father in heaven. Amen. Let's all stand.